I think we're good to go ahead and get started. I will be helping to man the chat. So if anybody has questions as we go along, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little chat bubble you can click on and add your questions. We'll have time for questions at the end, but if anything's really pressing, I'll interrupt Leslie and get it answered right away.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, can you see my picture for just a second? I'm going to show you some tools, and then I don't want you to look at me again. I want you to get rid of my picture. This is one of my tools. Danger, huh? Anybody know that? That's one of those Japanese knives. I'm going to talk about it later. My son gave that to me, and I'm not sure what that's saying. These, my favorite snippers of all time. I also sometimes trim my dog's hair, and you may hear some of my dogs. We just adopted a new one. So I'm up to 5. They're all sleeping right now. Let's hope they stay asleep. This is another cool tool to use that you'll see for digging around in the dirt. And then look, I want to show you one of my shoes. Can you see? There. Oh, I know you don't like that shoe. So a planted shoe with bromeliad. So we're going to talk today, though. Oh, I told you they're going to talk. Okay, everybody quiet. Okay, good job. Go sit down. Well, you're going to hear a little dog for a minute, but then they hopefully will be quiet. So container gardening is one of my favorite things to do. And I've learned a lot over the past few years about doing it here in Florida. It's a little different than in some other places because we have heat, humidity, and all those fun things. But we can do so many different types of plants in containers. I am a master gardener here in Lake County, Florida, with University of Florida UF-IFAS. And the majority of the stuff that I have is from UF-IFAS. I also have from a book that I'm going to share with you later, and also from a few other sites. So I am on the porch. So that was a bird going over. So here we go. Let's get started. What are we going to talk about today? A lot of different kinds of choices, like what do you want to plant? How do you want to shop for it? How do you go figure out what to buy? How to take care of your containers, and then a lot of different plant choices that are out there, the fun part on there. So, but first, why planting containers? And a lot of people ask me that. I have about 3 acres of land, but I love planting in containers as well. One reason is, you saw my picture there, I'm out on my porch. And so you got to have containers to have the plants on the porch. And I love having a lot of the plants here on the porch that I need to protect a little bit as well. And so sometimes also you want to do it because you have limited space. My niece lived in New York City and in San Diego, and while she was there, she planted in containers and ended up having a full vegetable garden that a lot of her neighbors enjoyed because she just planted them on the stoop. So limited space, sometimes you want to do the planter. But the other thing is sometimes you want to add drama or points of color to your garden. And you can do that both with the pot itself and with the plants that you put in it, which you can see with this one, with all the different bromeliads that are in this plant and other succulents that are they just pop and have such drama. The other thing is easy accessibility. A lot of the pots now are the raised type beds that you can do, but if you have difficulty with working with the plants that are in the ground, you can put them up on the countertop and have them there so that you easily can access them. The other thing is inclement weather. Now, we haven't really had a winter in a while, but we might. So the neat thing about containers is, even though we're in zone 9 here in Central Florida, I stretch it. Some of my plants and pots are definitely zone 10 and some zone 11. And the good thing about that is I can easily protect them. The other thing that you can do is, if we do get a hurricane, you can bring them in, or some of my larger plants, what I do with those in the pots is I lay them down on the ground or put them behind something to protect them. So if we get those high winds and heavy storms. The other thing is, I don't know about you, but I have some pretty poor soil. I have just pretty much sand, and no problem. You can do your own recipe for your potting soil. So if you've got that as an issue, you don't need to worry. And then ability to relocate. Now, this drives my husband crazy because I'm always like, let's move that pot over there. So if it's a bigger pot, you probably want to get one of those. I like the things that are wheels. We tried one of those things that's a pot carrier, and that did not do as well. You still need 2 people, and they're still difficult to do. But I like to put my bigger pots on wheels so that I can move them around if I want them in a different space. And then little weeding, that tool that I showed you earlier that had like a little like a hook on it. That's what I use for my weeding in my pots. It's little, not that you have much weeds, but if you do, you can use that to both loosen up the soil and to take care of any weeds that you have. So let's talk about the fun thing, choosing a container. Well, as you can see here, you can do about anything. Those high heel shoes, which have never been on my feet, are one thing that you can put them in. Below on the bottom, those are file drawers that were lined with some plastic and then used as a container for plants. About anything you can use. You want to choose things that aren't toxic, but even if there's an issue, you can line it with plastic to help control for that. You do want things that allow for drainage, so those shoes have holes in the bottom. But you do want to make sure that they don't hold too much water, that you can have the water leach out of the bottom of whatever the container is. And we'll talk about some different ways to handle that if you don't have holes in your pot. But you also want things that'll hold the potting mix. And I've made that mistake before. I've tried to do it in a really small container and it's just not enough room for the roots in the potting mix. So you need something that'll hold that potting mix. So really, about anything goes, as you'll see in some of our pictures. Choosing a container, you do want to think about color and design. You want to think of the picture on your left is a little bit more rustic, with the wine barrels, more Mediterranean type look. You have an Asian look to the side with the colors that are matching the door. So you want to think about what colors that you want and design. And as you know, from looking at containers these days, about anything goes, anything's out there. Suitability for your type of plant that you have and the size. And then stability. I'd be a little concerned about that plant on the right because it's pretty tall for that pot. However, those aren't heavy plants at the top. So may not be an issue, but you want things that are going to be stable for that as well. Usually you don't want more than 2/3 of the height of the plant to be more than 2/3 of that other. Whoop, wrong way. So choosing a container, well, consider the final plant size. Now, I will do a caveat there. A lot of times I will start a plant in a pot, and when it gets too big, I move it to another pot, or I move it to a bigger pot. So usually a lot of mine don't stay in the same pot. They get relocated. And then you do so many different choices now for materials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one. All those up in the top right corner are ones I've got that are either terracotta or ceramic. Those are all ceramic up there on the right. And they have a lot of advantages because they're range of cost. The one there on the left was really inexpensive. I got it, I think, at a dollar store or something. It's cute. And the neat thing about that one is it has a little cup thing attached at the bottom for the water to drain out. So some protection for that. The one on the right, that was my great aunt Millie's, and she had African violets in it for years. I moved plants in and out of it, but it doesn't have holes in the bottom, and I'm not going to drill holes in that. So I keep a plastic pot inside of that pot. And the one in the middle, shoot, I got that a while back, and it removed different plants in it, but it's a ceramic. It's kind of a modern look to it as well. So the cool thing about those is they have some great looks and diversity. Some of the negatives are if you drop them, they're probably going to break. Inexpensive terracotta pots are delicate, and the clay may begin to flake after a couple of years of use and slough away. So typically, if you want terracotta, you want something that's been lined or sealed in some way. Otherwise, the inside will dry out very quickly, and it can also leach the water from the pot, from the plants. So that's a negative with that. But I typically with terracotta, a lot of times, if that's going to be an issue, if it's a cheaper one, I'll line it with a plastic pot. The wooden ones can be really inexpensive. It can be used in an old chest or drawer, or it can be an easy do-it-yourself project. You can use wine boxes, barrels, anything that's wood. It can be less expensive. They can be really expensive, some of the ones you purchase, but they may decay after a few years and may need to be resealed periodically. So that can be a negative. A tip with those for the wood is to line them with a heavy plastic with holes in the bottom, and I like staple it around the edge and then put holes in the bottom, and then use pot feet to pick them up off the ground or a hard surface so that it's not right on the ground or patio. Metal, a cool look. That pot in the middle picture, the white one, is a metal pot, and it's pretty cool. But I ended up actually what I did for that, I put bubble wrap in the bottom so that it doesn't tend to rust, even though it's painted and coated well. And then I put plastic pots inside of that. The one thing about metal pots is if you have them outside in the sun, they get really, really hot and you don't want to touch them. And they can even burn your plants, or they'll definitely dry out the soil really fast. So if you're going to do metal, I typically line them in some way, but I also, I suggest not putting them out in the sun. And you can do holes on them. You can use like an awl or a large nail or a can opener sometimes to do holes. But again, that can tend to encourage rust in the future. So that can be a negative with that. Plastic, man, they are so much better than they used to be. They're diverse in shape and color. They're fairly resistant to damage. They can, and you can paint them. When they're on the right is painted. In the middle, you can also, you can go from using a 5-gallon birdseed container to a fairly expensive decorative plastic pot these days. One of the positives about them is they don't leach the water from the soil, and they're lightweight. They can fade over time in sun, but you can paint them. You can get some of that outdoor spray enamel and just spray and paint them and make a design on them as well. Or if they faded, use them as one of your liner pots. Fiberglass has come a long way in recent years, and it's often confused with plastic. But the cool thing about fiberglass is it's lightweight. It can be very elegant in the shapes. I have one that's shaped like a big urn, and another that's shaped like a wooden barrel. Hi, Monty wants to join the presentation. But they can be very elegant, and they're extremely durable. Now they will eventually, if they're outside after many years, they're gonna wear out. The fiberglass fibers start to wear and fray over time, and they're another one that it helps to elevate them with some feet to off of a surface to make them last longer. Concrete and hypertufa, I think I'm saying that right. Concrete is one of the most elegant containers you can get. They can be really humongous. You can have them made in all kinds of shapes, but where they are going to be is where they're going to be. They're extremely heavy. The hyper is lighter and has a cool look, and you can make all kinds of different designs with those. That's a fun project to do, especially with kids as well too. But you can just take a big leaf and use that. The hypertufa is a lightweight concrete that you kind of make yourself, and it's a mixture of concrete, the mix, peat moss, and perlite or vermiculite. And it takes a few weeks to cure, but it's a really cool thing to use for your plants. Fabric is another thing I've been getting into more, especially for things like my potatoes. The one bag that I have, the fabric bag, it actually has a window that you can open to look in to see how your potatoes are coming along. The neat thing about those is they're lightweight. You can move them around. At the end of the season, you hose them off, hang them up to dry, and bring them out at the next time of the season. I tend to use this more for my herbs and vegetables. But the main thing is you want those pots with drainage holes, or you can add an insert. You can see that one on the right there that kind of, it's going to raise the plant pretty much out of sitting in the water, and it's going to have like an area for the water to be in the bottom so the plant doesn't get root rot. So if it doesn't have holes, you can do that. So such diversity, so many choices. One of the things I use a lot, especially with tomatoes, but I've used them some with some more flowering things, are the self-watering containers. Now, they don't water themselves really, but you just put the water and it's got the reservoir in the bottom, and then the roots go down to get to the water. I have found that to be really good with peppers and tomatoes. And I wish y'all could see this. My new boy is got his nose in one of my containers. Get down from there, Pete. Wall pots are another really cool thing. And the neat thing about those is, like on the left, you can see there's a grid that's been put up on the wall, and then their hooks and the plants are just hung on there. The one on the right, it's a more of a concrete or stucco surface, so the pots can be right up against it. And the other one is, again, it's flat on the back. And that's perfect for your orchids that you do as well. Another thing with wall pots that I've found is we've got on our porch, we did hardy board instead of the cypress and the wood. And so it's very resistant to the water. So I don't have to worry about the plants damaging that. So I've got quite a few wall pots up on there. The other thing, here's the easiest, y'all, unplanted containers. Sometimes the container itself is just so beautiful and you put it out in the garden. This is from Lou Gardens, and Jim Davis took these pictures. But I mean, boy, what a striking look in your garden to set off with the colors for the plants that are around it, and the easiest to grow. So let's talk about another choice, your potting mix. You got your pot. You want something that drains well, but it also is going to hold some moisture between waterings. Now, in the heat of the summer, you're going to have to water a lot, most of your plants. But some ways I like to do my own mixture. I do buy some potting soil. And the good thing about the potting soil that you buy is a lot of times now it already has some fertilizer in it to start your plants. But then adding to it, depending on how much you put of these things, is depending on the type of plants you got. But peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, perlite or vermiculite, that helps it retain the water. Compost for enrichment, that would be for some of my plants like caladiums, which like a really rich soil. For my things like your bromeliads and cactus, I add more of the builder's sand. And you do want to use builder's sand that you buy at the big box stores for that. But I like to do a mixture of that. And again, depending on what your plan is how much you'll use of each of those things. So choosing plants. This is actually the planter that Pete just had his nose in. So I'm not sure what he was looking for, but when you're choosing plants, you want similar light and water requirements for those plants, because obviously they're going to be in the same location. So you do need to research that before you choose your plant. And then it's good if you're going to put more than one plant in a pot, is look at your height. You want something that's taller. You want something that's going to flow more. You want diversity in the colors and the texture. All of these things can make for a really interesting pot. Now this pot, interesting, and I've got some air plants. Sometimes I just stick those in there for a little pop of color. You can do seeds or bulbs or transplants. Now this one is all transplants, I think. Yes. That were used for that, but all different ways you can do your different plants. Like I said earlier, I mean, we're zone 9 here in Central Florida. You can stretch your plants to zones 10 and 11 if you can protect them. My plants that I have outside that I can't move in that are more that, I have big bags that I put over them. And I've even put like a Christmas lights around in there to give it some heat if we'd ever had the cold, that cold, if I couldn't bring the plant inside. It's harder to do the plants that are for zones like 7 and above because of our heat. But if you're going to do it inside, you could possibly do that with controlling it. But if it's an outside plant here, you might be able to protect a plant that can go to zone 8, but our heat is going to get it if you have it outside. So y'all ready to talk about how to shop, picking a pot? This was from Brooke Moffis, who's the extension agent at our office. She said she likes to go pick out her pot. You can tell she's here at the nursery, picked out that pot. She wants a wooden one. Look at the size that you want for the space that you're going to put the pot, and then start looking at your plants. So if you're doing multiple plants in a pot, probably there's one of the ways designs that you can look at is pick a thriller, and that's going to be your tall plant and something to give you drama. As you can see here with the Dracaena, it gives you that pop of color, and will and again, it will stand out in the pot over the other plants. And then a filler. And on this one, we've got coleus that we've added in here and putting that around the pot. That's going to kind of mound in the pot. And then a spiller that you're going to add in there to flow. And this is this one is the Calabroca. I'm never going to say that. Calabroca. And it will flow over the edge of the pot, and it can sometimes act as your filler as well. So adding all those together can give you a neat looking look. Here's another one that she did with oleander as your tall. I don't do oleander because my dogs might chew it, not good for them. Pentas, again, for more of your mounding and filler. And then guar, a whirling butterfly, one of my favorite plants, just kind of lightens it up and gives it that pop of color. And the neat thing about these as well, all of these are plants that'll grow well together. They like the same water and sun, but they also will, let's say that if you have like a penta that starts to fade, you can easily replace that plant. So not a hard thing to do. And the number with you have in your pot there, you can figure out how many plants you really need. You can actually set them in the pot and see if you've got the right number for your pot. So how do we plant? The one suggestion I've learned that I think makes the biggest difference is if you can wait, if you've just gotten your plant and you've got to plant it right then that's okay. But definitely water your transplant before you put it in your pot. So give it a good soaking, let the water leach out of the bottom, and then let it sit for a little bit before you do. I like to put a screen or weed cloth over the holes in the bottom of the container. Both of those can help with the dirt coming out of the bottom, if you will. Then look at the depth of your plant in its pot. And that kind of tells you how high you want to partially fill your soil so that you can start setting your plants into your pot. So your final soil surface in the end, you're going to want to have between 1 to 4 inches below your surface. Reason for that is really twofold. Number one, when you're watering, then the water won't pour out of the top. Number two, you can add some mulch on top, and that can really help retain the water well. Water that soil again, and then gently, I'm going to say gently remove the plants from the pot. Sometimes it doesn't always happen that way. The one suggestion I have, if the plant is of the size that you can handle with one hand, then you would turn the plant over and putting the stem or whatever, the stem of the plant through your fingers, hold it in the other hand, and gently try to tap the plant over the pot. So the dirt goes into the pot, but gently try to tap it and kind of squeeze it out, if you will, out of your pot that you have. If that doesn't work, then I recommend gently next tapping the bottom of that pot on a hard surface. And don't break it if it's a pot that's breakable, but forget to, again, to loosen it up. If that doesn't work, remember that knife that I showed y'all at the beginning, my Japanese knife, that I use around the edge of the pot to kind of loosen it up as well. Because I mean, I hate to say it, even some that I've gotten from some of the good nurseries lately, they've been root bound when I've gotten the plants. So sometimes it's hard to get them out of the pot. And then when you've got the plant out of the pot, kind of loosen that soil, check your roots of the plant, and trim off the roots if they're dead or rotten. If they're root bound, go on and you can do a major cut of those roots. Oh, a question I got one of the last times. If those roots are coming out of the bottom of the pot when you have the plant, you know that that's probably root bound. Go on and cut those those roots off before you try to remove the plant from the pot. The other thing you can do, let me go back to gently removing, is with the plastic pot. Sometimes you can I take my Japanese knife and I split the side of the pot and open up the pot around it if I'm not going to reuse that pot for some reason. So, but the main thing you want to do is to not damage the plant itself. The roots you can, like I said, you may need to trim them off. They're dead or they're rotten, or if they're circular in the pot, you want to go on and cut those roots and spread them out as much as you can before you insert them into the pot. So loosen the soil around those roots and then spread the roots and insert them in the pot. And then you start adding your potting soil around the plants. And you want to just put the soil as high as the plant was in the original pot. So if you have different size plants that you're putting into a pot, you're going to have to adjust that as you're adding the soil and the depth that you put of your plant. Adding your mulch on top, I really find this makes a big difference in plants. And I even do it in my ones that are on the porch. And mainly for that is to help them in retaining water, the ones that especially need the water. Water it again, let the water leach out of the bottom of the pot, and then enjoy your plants. So if you're doing seeds, really all you have to do is, and I use that thing that I showed you that I used for that has a little hook on it. I use those when I'm doing seeds. I just push it down into the soil, put the seed in there. And the fun thing about doing seeds is adding them to your other plants is that you'll have different pops of color come out through the year. I typically do the annuals with seeds. Helps. Size does matter in a pot. Too big, it's going to hold excess water and can cause root rot. And then the roots are going to focus on filling the pot, not on growing foliage or flowers. They're going to say, I got to fill up this area. So too big can be a problem. But if it's too small, then the roots don't have enough room to support the plant and they become root bound and it can dry out too fast. So you really need to kind of match your plant to the size of your pot. Let's say that you have a really big pot though, and you want to put several plants in there and maybe some that are smaller. What you can do as well is sometimes leave that plant in a plastic pot and put it in the bigger pot and then cover up with dirt if you're concerned about it not doing well in that bigger pot. Let's talk about watering. First of all, in the picture, you see the thing that I love. That is a water wand that bends and flexes. And that is a very helpful thing to use with water in your pots. I also have like a water bucket that I use and other things, and I do use the hose, just regular hose on some that are out in the yard, but those water wands are great things to use. The containers are going to dry out faster than they do, and the plants do in the ground. So here in the summer, especially, well, now, you probably are going to have to water every day or every few days, especially if the plants are out in the sun, or if they're on a hard surface. For example, I have some on an outside patio and they get full sun. Those pots get watered every single day. The one thing that you can do is what they call the knuckle test. And that's where you take your finger, bend it, and put it in the pot, down in the dirt, and see whether it's damp about an inch down. If it is, then don't water. The top's going to dry out pretty fast. But if it's still damp underneath, then you don't need to water. We already talked about the water. The other thing that you can do is also, I've got that on the next slide. So you do want to water until that water leaches out of the drainage holes. As you can see in the picture to the left, it's got water coming out of the bottom. And so you need to make sure it's on a surface that you don't mind that the water leaches out of the drainage holes. But one thing that does help is raising the pot off that surface. It reduces the heat in the pot, because otherwise it's going to get that heat, if you will, from the hard surface. But it also reduces drainage if it's sitting directly on the surface, which you want the water to be able to drain out of your pot. Clay and wood containers, they will pull water from plants, especially terracotta or clay that's not been sealed. So those you might need to water more than your plastic the pots that you have. And there are some water holding gels that you can use with some pot plants that need to have more moisture. You wouldn't want that with a bromeliad or orchid or anything like that, but some of the plants that like to have a little bit damper feet, those water holding gels are good to use. Let's talk fertilizer. You can do either slow release fertilizer or water soluble. I tend to do slow release fertilizer, except for a few of my plants that are very needy. Be careful with water soluble that you don't overfeed the plants. For like bromeliads and other less needy plants, they don't need as much fertilizer. In fact, there's some of mine that I've probably maybe fertilized once a year. So really dilute if you're using water soluble. You can do like a tablespoon per gallon, if you will, for those. Some of your plants like Calabrachia, those are if you want them to bloom, you've got to fertilize them. So those you want to do a water soluble every couple of weeks. I tend to do a slow release fertilizer. And then for those, the ones that really need the food, I would add that in, add that every couple of weeks for them. Purchase potting mixes, we already said, most of them already have fertilizer, which can last a few months. But your biggest problem most of us have is over fertilizing, unless it's a heavy feeder. So you really need to see whether or not the plant really wants a lot of fertilizer or not. If your plant is wilted or very dry, do not fertilize the plant. It will burn the plant. So refresh it first, let it sit a couple of days, get some more water in its system, and then fertilize. Don't do it right away after you water it. Wait a couple of days before you do. Let the plant get a little bit healthier with that. So maintenance, couple of things. They recommend you replace your potting mix annually. I have to say with my big pots, I'm not that good about doing that. But I do I top dress them annually. So I add some more potting mix and some compost to those each year. But it's good to really take them out and tease and trim any roots in those pots if you can. So really pulling them out and looking to see whether they're healthy roots or not. Is really crucial for maintaining plants for years. I do have a jade plant that I've had in the same pot for probably 15 years, and I've never taken it out of the pot, and it's fine. I mean, it's humongous, but it's fine. So, but like I said, I do add the new potting soil on the top, and kind of I get in there and I stir the pot, if you will. I take some chopsticks or a fork or the hook that I have, and I kind of soften up the soil, if you will, because it will get compacted after time. And it's always amazing to me, sometimes when you pull a plant out of a pot and you look and there's no soil left. I mean, where'd it go? But it will disappear over time. So you do want to make sure that it's got enough potting soil, not just roots in there. Removing faded blooms. Now, not all plants need that. That's one thing about Calibracha is that it does not need that. But dead leaves, weeds, you need to get those out of there. Pinch the shoots or clip them using trimmers to encourage branching of a lot of plants. It's a good thing to do. Check for diseases or pests. I tend to pick off insects or squash them and not spray as much. But if you need to do, there are specific things that you might want to try before you use a strong insecticide. We have whole presentations about that. But I do sometimes will use a neem oil or insecticidal soap on plants if needed. And then stir the pot, as I said. I find that is really helpful. I do that a couple of times a year. Just go in and kind of check, move the soil around a little bit. Don't damage the roots, but give it kind of aerate, if you will, that soil. So big question, what to grow? Well, here are all the different things you can do. And all for different things. Annuals can give you a quick pop of color. You can do with seeds, perennial seeds as well. But they are long lasting. Your fruits and vegetables and herbs, you can eat edibles. I like to do some of the smaller shrubs and trees and grasses. So really about anything you want to plant in a pot, you can do. So some vegetables, we're going to talk about edibles first, vegetables, fruits, and herbs. Vegetable crops, generally they need about 8 to 10 hours of sunlight. The only thing I see different than that is lettuces. I tend to do those in the shade or part shade, not full shade, but part shade. But I typically like to look for the drawer for bush type varieties and get the widest pot you can get for your roots. And you can, these are, just plastic pots that are there on the top, and with the different plants, they look, it's attractive. The plants, and you can eat, that's got squash and peppers, tomatoes. You can add, I've done beans in a pot and done a trellis in there for them to climb on. And taller plants, sometimes you need to stake them as well. But tomatoes, beans, about any kind of vegetable you can grow, if you will, in a pot. And like I said, the fabric pots work wonderfully with those. I've got some lettuce growing in the fabric pots right now on the porch because the heat's too much for them outside. Fruit crops, most again prefer full sun. They will typically need frequent watering, more so than what they would get in the ground. There are some citrus that are great in the pot, some of the limes and lemons. There are a few oranges that are smaller plants that will grow well. And when they get too big, you can plant them out in the garden, or you can just keep trimming them back. Remember, though, the size of the plant relates to the amount of fruit that you're going to get if you're really doing it for the fruit as well. Pineapple, to me, is one of the easiest things that it can be to grow. You eat the pineapple from the store. You trim the top off, you put it in a pot. That's pretty much it. And right now I've got them growing everywhere. So we're gonna have a pineapple harvest. They do take, I got somebody who asked me this the other day, they do take at least to the second year before you're gonna get pineapple. So don't think you're gonna plant that top and get a pineapple that first year. Herb crops, well, we all know about these. It's got some Cuban oregano and chives, rosemary, basil. African basil is a great one to do with those. It'll get really big. That's time that we have. The critical thing with herbs is you've got to use it a lot. You got to keep trimming it and to have it grow well, and use it often to have it get a nice shape. Don't overwater. This is one of the ones that if you want to kill it, give it too much water or fertilize. They don't want a lot of fertilizer. So I typically, after the plant's been in a pot for a while, I'll do some slow release fertilizer on it and then won't do it again as long as it's in that pot. And it'll let you know if it needs some fertilizer. It'll look a little peaked. The rosemary very rarely needs fertilizer. Consider growing it in a sunny kitchen window. Know if they're outside, for example, parsley and those, you're going to get some butterflies because they're going to come for that. So some of your herbs you might be sharing with insects, which that's a good thing to have butterflies. So Let's talk a little bit about design. We've got a few minutes here. Color theory. This is where you start looking at colors of plants you're going to do. So you've got the different, your color wheel. This is some research done from Texas A&M. And they said when you're looking at plants, think about your color wheel and what kind of impact you want. I'm going to go through this real quick. One, color things. Let's say if you're like me, I like things to be soothing sometimes. That would be your monochromatic. That would be where you're using colors from the same part of the wheel, like your purples and blues in this case, or yellows and oranges. Those would be more of a soothing because they're the same type of color. Others, dramatic is analogous. They're closely related, but they're not in the same part of the wheel. So you've got your yellow and red that you've got with that one. So that is another neat thing you can do with colors. And then dramatic that you want, this would be really attracting attention. These are called complementary, and they come from the opposite side of the color wheel, like your blues and oranges, which is UF. They want to attract attention. So this would be a pot just for University of Florida. Neutrals, white, gray. So that's got like lamb's ear, some guara, different plants in there, soothing with white, black, and gray. And foliage is another thing I like to add in with your flowers. So you've got a lamb's ear, you've got grasses that you can put in with it. And typically the rule of thumb, that's not a rule, is 1 foliage to 3 flowering type plants. What we call color echoing, and that's where you go, where you carry the plants, like your sweet potato vine you got on the right, where it's matching your coleus that you got with that little pop, or your Persian shield in the middle with the purple. It's different colors. Grouping pots is another thing that you can do for a thing. Here's one Jim Davis took again. Look, you've got ground orchids, bromeliads, all kinds of stuff in there. Sansevieria, amaryllis, just a wonderful grouping. And grouping again where the plants, 1 plant per pot, type of Dieffenbachia, and then you've got the 3 pots with different colors. Another grouping I like, striking. So let's talk some plants. This is a nice plant. You got your thriller, filler, spiller. So you got your Pennisetum rubrum and Persian shield, and your Alternthera or true yellow up there on the left, lemon drop on your right, and sweet potato vine on your right as well at the bottom. Now, the good thing about sweet potato vine is you just keep hacking it back, take those pieces, stick it in water, and you have another plant. Great one to do for that. Caladiums are great plants for pots, and there's so many different colors. They like shade. They will want to be fertilized pretty frequently, but they don't want wet feet at all. So you want to let them dry out a little bit in between watering. But you can see here with the contrast. Another one with caladiums with the mixture. Here's a mixture with Dieffenbachia and Impatiens as your spiller. Isn't that a great looking plant? This is an African daisy and Calibrachoa. Let me tell you a little bit about that. That is a type of petunia. It's bred from the petunia, but it stands the heat and it stands full sun. It does like a little trimming. You don't have to deadhead it, which is really great. It will just get rid of those flowers, which petunia sometimes you have to deadhead. But great in hanging baskets and as a filler spiller plant, and it will take our full sun that we have here. Here's one with your pentas again, and another color. So many different colors in that, and you've got blue days in there as well. There's your super petunia on the top, in the shade, and then your Calibrachoa, which is also called million bells, on the right, which is in the full sun. Here's a neat one. Whirling butterfly, Calibrachoa, see a pattern here, and then sweet potato vine. That's the Margarita one, which is a nice color. Some of the things you can do are theme gardens, like adding adult food for the butterflies that is going to be its nectar. This is an echinacea mix, and then larva with fennel and parsley. do questions in a minute. Here's another nice theme one, a salsa garden, so you can eat it all. Tomatoes, tomatillas, onions, cilantro, peppers, all grown together in pots. So you can fix your dinner. A beach garden. Again, that's an old boat. And again, was going to rot if you put the plants right in it, but just put it in pots into the boat for that. And the ultimate container, if you will, here's a house that's a container. It is a container that was made into a house, and then the rooftops are your gardens. And that, to me, is just your ultimate container garden. So, but think outside the pot. That's the main thing about anything. If you see it, it looks interesting. I've even, to embarrass my son, I would pick up stuff on the side of the road and say, oh, that would make a great pot. And things can be recycled. And we have one like this in our garden at the Discovery Gardens that is full of bromeliads in our tropical garden. So you need to come see that if you've not. An old fountain. Here's an old boat again, added with some pots. I love this one. The sink, water fountain, if you will. It's got a hidden. And then the possibilities are endless. This is a garden here in Mount Dora backyard, and man, they like the pots. But a thing I love about this is all different sizes, and look how they have them up on different things to give that drama. And then the reason they really like this garden is because then they can switch out those plants very easily for their garden. Boy, talk about an impact. So some resources. This book, it's still around. It's called Container Gardens for Florida. It's by Pamela Crawford, a great book, and one that I've used extensively. Some of the pictures that I have in here were from Smith Carey from Alabama, Cooperative Extension Service, and then Texas A&M as well, and then the University of Florida Gardening Solutions. A lot of the pointers about how to handle the plants. And then our database is a great resource where you can look up plants and figure out what you want to plant, what works well together, and what will grow here in our area. And then questions. Here's our contact information and Jamie's email. So if you have questions or anything for those. So I'm going to stop talking